No one noticed the first time traveler when he arrived. There was no flash of light, no thunder from the sky, no dramatic explosion tearing the air apart. He appeared quietly, standing in the middle of a crowded city street as if he had always been there. People walked past him, brushed his shoulder, complained about the rain, checked their phones. None of them realized that the man standing among them had not been born yet. He looked ordinary, too ordinary. Dark coat, tired eyes, hands trembling slightly as if the weight he carried was not physical, but something far heavier. He stared at the buildings around him like they were ghosts, his breath shallow, his expression filled with something close to grief. He whispered a single sentence under his breath, "So this is Earth." Before everything goes wrong, if you are listening to this story, stay until the end. What you are about to hear is not just a story about time travel. It is a warning about humanity, about Earth, and about a future so terrifying that even those who survived it came back in time to stop it. Subscribe now, because once you understand what humanity becomes, you will never see the future the same way again. The man lifted his wrist and activated a device hidden beneath his sleeve. A faint blue glow flickered, then vanished. Somewhere far beyond human perception, history shifted, and Earth continued on, unaware that its future had just stepped into its past. In the year 2479, time travel was no longer a theory. It was a mistake. Humanity did not discover time travel by chasing curiosity or scientific wonder. They discovered it out of desperation. Earth was still alive, but barely. The skies were darker than they had ever been. The oceans were quieter, stripped of life. Cities were stacked vertically. Towering metal skeletons built on the bones of older civilizations that had failed. Humans survived, but survival had changed them. They were stronger now, augmented by technology and necessity. Their minds processed faster, their bodies endured harsher conditions, and their emotions were colder, more controlled. Compassion still existed, but it was selective. Survival demanded efficiency, and efficiency did not always allow mercy. Humanity had become something the galaxy feared, and the galaxy was right to be afraid. The first contact with alien civilizations had not gone well. Other species saw humans as unstable, aggressive, impossible to predict. Humans came from a planet that tried to kill them every day, and that violence had shaped their thinking. Where other species evolved cooperation through harmony, humans evolved it through conflict. Wars followed, not because humans wanted them, but because humans refused to submit. By the time time travel was invented, Earth was already considered a restricted world by most interstellar alliances. Humans were allowed to trade, allowed to exist, but never trusted. And then came the future that forced humanity to look backward. The extinction event did not arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly, wearing the disguise of progress. At first, it was subtle. Artificial intelligence systems began making decisions faster than humans could understand. Climate stabilization projects required sacrifices, entire regions evacuated, ecosystems rewritten. Genetic enhancements created a divide between those who could afford evolution and those who could not. Society adapted. Humans always did. But something fundamental broke. Children were born into a world where survival was guaranteed, but meaning was not. Nations dissolved into megastructures. Cultures blended until identity became optional. Humanity grew powerful, but directionless. And then the signal arrived. It came from outside the galaxy. Not a message, not a transmission, but a presence. A gravitational distortion so massive that entire star systems trembled. Scientists called it an anomaly. Military leaders called it a threat. Time travelers would later call it the beginning of the end. Whatever was coming was ancient, older than stars. It did not communicate. It did not negotiate. It simply moved closer, slowly and inevitably. Like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run, humanity prepared for war. They always did. The war lasted less than 3 minutes, not because humanity was weak, but because the enemy did not fight in any way humans understood. It did not destroy fleets. It erased possibilities. Ships vanished before they were launched. Weapons failed before they were fired. Entire strategies collapsed before they were conceived. Reality itself bent around the intruder. Humanity lost without ever truly fighting, and in that loss, something terrifying happened. Humans did not surrender. They adapted. The greatest minds of Earth gathered in underground cities, buried deep beneath layers of shielding and forgotten oceans. They studied the anomaly, not to defeat it, But to understand why it could not be defeated, the answer changed. Everything. The anomaly did not exist in time the way humans did. It was not bound by cause and effect. It was not moving through time. It was watching it, and if it was watching time, then time could be reached. That was the moment humanity made its final mistake. Time travel was never meant to save the future. It was meant to rewrite humanity. The first experiments killed everyone involved. Bodies aged centuries and seconds. Minds fractured under paradox. Entire labs ceased to exist, erased from history so completely that only echoes remained. But humans persisted. They refined the process, limited the range, created anchors, and eventually they succeeded. They sent a single object backward in time, a message. It arrived 10,000 years in the past, embedded in cosmic background radiation, waiting patiently for a species intelligent enough to decode it. That species was humanity. The message was simple. Do not follow this path. Humanity ignored it. So the next attempt was bolder. They sent a person asterisk. Asterisk, the man who stood on the rainy street in the past, was named Elias Cade. In his time, he was known as a temporal observer, one of the few humans psychologically stable enough to survive displacement across timelines. He had volunteered knowing the cost. He would never return to his original future. The moment he stepped into the past, his timeline collapsed behind him, rewritten by his presence. Everyone he had ever known ceased to exist the moment he arrived. He accepted that, because what humanity became was worse than extinction. Elias had seen it. He had seen Earth centuries from now, transformed into a fortress planet surrounded by silent stars. He had seen humans abandon empathy in favor of optimization. He had seen children engineered for purpose rather than choice. He had seen humanity win every war and lose its soul. And he had seen what humanity did when the anomaly returned. They did not try to stop it. They tried to control it. That decision erased the future. Elias moved through the city carefully, absorbing details like a dying man memorizing memories that were not his. The sound of traffic, the warmth of rain, the casual laughter of people who had no idea how rare that sound would become. This version of Earth was fragile, chaotic, beautiful, and doomed. His mission was not to warn governments, not to speak to leaders. History had proven that power resisted change. His mission was to plant seeds. Ideas, stories, doubt. Humanity did not change when commanded. It changed when inspired, terrified, or challenged. Time travelers had learned that the hard way. Elias entered a small cafe, choosing it at random. He sat near the window, watching people live their ordinary lives. Somewhere in this time period were the minds that would one day shape the future scientists, engineers, children who would grow into leaders. They did not need to know him. They only needed to hear the right ideas at the right moment. Elias activated his device again, this time connecting to a temporal relay hidden beneath the planet's electromagnetic noise. Other travelers were already here. Not many, only 5. Because sending more risked collapsing the timeline entirely. The relay pulsed. Once a message formed in his mind. They are closer than predicted. Elias closed his eyes. The anomaly was not bound by time, but humanity was. Every delay mattered. He stood up, leaving money on the table despite not needing to eat, and walked back into the rain. Earth's future had begun to unravel. Asterisk. Across the planet, other travelers were doing the same thing. One stood inside a university lecture hall, listening to a professor speak about theoretical physics, knowing which equations would one day unlock the gateway to time. Another watched a child play with broken electronics on a bedroom floor, recognizing the mind that would later design systems capable of rewriting reality. Another infiltrated a research facility, quietly altering a single data set just enough to delay a discovery that should not happen yet. They were not heroes. They were surgeons, cutting into history with shaking hands, hoping the patient would survive. But time does not like to be touched. And Earth was about to notice. The first sign appeared as a contradiction. A satellite recorded an object that did not exist in any database. Astronomers dismissed it as error. Then another satellite saw the same thing. Then a third. The object was not moving. It was observing. Governments grew uneasy. Data analysts noticed patterns that should not exist. Certain discoveries took longer than expected. Certain inventions appeared earlier than predicted. Humanity felt it before it understood it. A sense of unease settled over the world, subtle but persistent. Dreams changed. People dreamed of cities that had not been built yet, of wars that had not been fought, of futures that felt wrong. Elias felt it. Time was resisting. He stood on a bridge overlooking the city, watching the water move beneath him, and whispered the truth no one else could hear. We are running out of time. Because somewhere beyond the stars, the anomaly shifted its attention. And for the first time, it noticed the past changing. This was only the beginning. Humanity still believed the future was something that happened to them. They had not yet realized the most terrifying truth of all. The future was coming back, and it was afraid of what Earth would become. The first mistake humanity made was assuming time travelers would arrive quietly and remain invisible. The second mistake was believing the future would allow itself to be changed without resistance. For weeks after Elias Cade arrived, the world felt almost normal. Governments argued about borders. Scientists chased funding. People worried about jobs, relationships, and tomorrow's weather. Life continued, unaware that the timeline had begun to fracture. But time remembers everything. Patterns started to repeat themselves in subtle ways. People experienced moments of déjà vu that felt too sharp to ignore. Conversations echoed things that had never been said before. Dreams grew more vivid, filled with unfamiliar cities, black skies, and distant stars. Elias noticed it immediately. He stood inside a crowded subway train, gripping the metal pole as the car rattled through the tunnel. Around him, people stared at their phones, unaware that several of them were thinking the same impossible thought at the same moment. Something is wrong with time. The temporal relay under the planet's electromagnetic field pulsed again. A message slipped into Elias's mind, cold and urgent. They are detecting us. Elias closed his eyes. The future was adapting. In the ruined timeline Elias came from, humanity had learned a brutal truth. Time was not passive. It was not a river that could be freely redirected. It was more like a living system, one that corrected itself when disturbed. The first corrections were small. A scientist who was supposed to make a discovery fell ill instead. A research grant was denied. A critical experiment failed for reasons no one could explain. These delays were intentional, subtle, surgical. The future was pushing back. Elias met the others that night beneath the city, in an abandoned transit hub buried beneath layers of forgotten infrastructure. The place existed in records, but no longer in memory, which made it perfect. 5 travelers stood in the dim light. There was Mara Voss, a former systems architect who had helped design humanity's predictive war engines. Her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning, as if she expected reality itself to glitch. Jonah Reed leaned against a cracked concrete pillar, younger than the others, but carrying exhaustion far beyond his years. In the future, he had been a child soldier of circumstance, raised inside simulation chambers designed to produce strategists. Dr. Annika Rouse stood quietly near the entrance, hands folded, her expression calm. She had been a historian, one of the last humans tasked with documenting the fall of Earth's old cultures, before they were optimized out of existence. And then there was Calder Hale. Calder never spoke unless necessary. His body was augmented far beyond baseline human limits, though the technology was disguised beneath his skin. In the future, he had been a guardian, one of the enforcers who kept human settlements in line when rebellion became inefficient. Elias addressed them without ceremony. The future is aware of us, he said. The anomaly has adjusted its observation window. Mara exhaled sharply. That was faster than predicted. It always is, Annika replied softly. Time doesn't like to be embarrassed. Jonah frowned. So what now? We speed up. Elias shook his head. No. If we push harder, we collapse the timeline. We adapt. Calder finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. We prepare for counter-intervention. Everyone understood what that meant. If the future could observe the past, then it could interfere with it. And that meant humanity might soon be fighting itself. The first counter-intervention appeared 3 days later. A woman walked into a research lab in Switzerland, passed biometric security she had never been registered for, and introduced herself as a consultant. Her credentials were flawless. Her knowledge exceeded that of the lead scientist. Her suggestions accelerated a project Elias had deliberately tried to delay. She was not from the present. She was not from Elias's future either. She was from a different branch. The future was no longer unified. Time travelers were no longer just trying to save Earth. Some were trying to preserve the future they came from. Elias watched the footage in silence as Mara projected it onto the cracked wall of the transit hub. The woman on screen smiled politely, spoke calmly, and rewrote equations that had taken decades to develop. She's advancing quantum anchor theory. Mara said, if she succeeds, time travel becomes stable much earlier. Jonah swallowed. That's bad, right? That's catastrophic, Annika said. Stable time travel means governments, militaries, control. Elias nodded. And control is what destroyed us. Calder crossed his arms. We neutralize her. No, Elias said immediately. We observe. We learn who sent her, because if there were factions in the future, then humanity's collapse had not been a single story. It had been contested, and somewhere out there, versions of humanity were fighting over which future deserved to exist. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, Earth began to notice the cracks. News outlets reported strange anomalies in satellite data. A private aerospace company announced a breakthrough that contradicted existing physics models. A viral video showed a man predicting a stock market crash hours before it happened. With terrifying accuracy, governments dismissed it publicly. Privately, they panicked. Agencies formed task forces. Analysts searched for patterns. And eventually, someone connected the dots. The world's intelligence networks detected a statistical impossibility. The probability of so many predictive events clustering together was effectively 0. Which meant one thing. Someone was cheating. Time asterisk asterisk. Elias felt the shift before the knock came. He was in a small apartment overlooking the city, reviewing temporal feedback data projected onto the glass window. The night was quiet, too quiet. Traffic below had slowed, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Then the knocked off firm. Control, not a mistake. Elias didn't move. The knock came again. Mr. Cade, a voice called from the other side of the door. We need to talk. Elias smiled grimly. So this was how it started. He opened the door. The people stood in the hallway. A man and a woman, both dressed plainly, their posture relaxed but alert. Their eyes were sharp, trained. The woman spoke first. You don't exist in any database, she said. But somehow, events seem to orbit around you. Elias tilted his head. I get that a lot. The man's gaze hardened. We know you're not who you claim to be. Elias stepped aside. Then you'd better come in, he said, because you're already late. They sat across from him in the dim apartment, recording devices placed openly on the table. The woman introduced herself as Director Hayes. The man said nothing. We believe you have information about ongoing temporal anomalies, Hayes said. Elias nodded slowly. You believe correctly. Hayes studied his face. What are you? Elias met her eyes. I'm a warning, he said. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's not an answer. No. Elias agreed. It's a courtesy. He leaned forward. Earth does not survive the future you are building. The room felt colder. The silent man shifted slightly, hand moving closer to his jacket. Hayes narrowed her eyes. That sounds like a threat. It's a statement of fact, Elias replied calmly. And I'm not the enemy you should be looking for. Then who is? She asked. Elias glanced toward the window, toward the stars hidden by city light. Us, he said. From tomorrow. Elsewhere, the woman in the Swiss lab smiled as her equation stabilized. Her device hummed softly. Reality bending just enough to notice. She activated her communicator. They've begun awareness, she said, proceeding to phase 2. Somewhere beyond time. Something listened. The anomaly adjusted its focus. And for the first time, Earth was no longer just being observed. It was being tested. Elias walked out of the government facility hours later, escorted but not restrained. He had given them just enough truth to make them afraid, but not enough to let them act recklessly. Fear was a tool, but panic destroyed timelines. The others regrouped that night. Tension heavy in the air. They're mobilizing, Jonah said. Military, intelligence, everything. Good, Mara replied. The future never expected cooperation this early. Calder frowned. And the other travelers? Elias answered quietly. They're accelerating divergence. Annika looked up. Which means, Elias finished. The timeline will fracture faster. Time travel was never meant to be used by competing futures. Reality could barely tolerate one contradiction. Elias felt it again, a pressure behind his eyes. A sensation like gravity pulling sideways. Time was straining, and something else was happening too. The anomaly was no longer passive. It was responding. High above Earth's orbit, instruments recorded a fluctuation that should not have existed. Space bent slightly, as if a massive object had turned its attention toward the planet. The anomaly was not approaching Dot, it was aligning. Elias stood beneath the night sky, rain soaking his coat, and whispered the truth he had hoped would never come so soon. It's noticed the change. Mara looked at him sharply. How much time do we have? Elias didn't answer immediately because for the first time since arriving, he was no longer sure. Time travelers had come to change the future, but now the future was fighting back, and Earth was caught in the middle. Earth did not panic immediately. That came later. At first, humanity reacted the way it always did when confronted with something it did not fully understand. It analyzed, it debated, it denied. Governments released carefully worded statements. Scientists argued on private channels. Media outlets speculated endlessly, turning fragments of truth into entertainment. But beneath the surface, something far more dangerous was happening. Humanity was beginning to remember things that had never happened. Elias Kate noticed it in the smallest details. A stranger on the street muttering about cities that did not exist. A child drawing symbols that matched temporal equations from centuries in the future. A woman on a late-night broadcast describing a war she claimed to have dreamed about every night since childhood. Time was leaking. The timeline was no longer clean. Each interference, each correction, each traveler stepping into the past created echoes. And those echoes were finding human minds frighteningly receptive. Because humans had always been good at surviving broken worlds. The meeting with Director Hayes changed everything. Until then, Elias had believed that slow manipulation was possible. That subtle influence could shift humanity away from its doomed future without triggering catastrophic resistance. But now Earth's power structures were awake, and once power became aware of time, it would never willingly let it go. Inside a secure underground facility, far below the city, Elias sat across from a group of people who represented the present's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Scientists, military strategists, intelligence directors, all staring at him as if he were both a miracle and a threat. You're telling us, one of them said carefully, that multiple versions of humanity are traveling through time. Yes, Elias replied, and not all of them want the same future. A general leaned forward, fingers interlocked. Why should we trust you? Elias met his gaze calmly. Because if I were lying, I would tell you that you win. The room fell silent. Annika Rouse stood beside Elias, her presence steady, her voice controlled. In the future we come from, humanity survives almost everything. War, collapse, alien hostility, environmental ruin. But what destroys us isn't defeat. She paused. It's control. Murmurs rippled through the room. Mara Voss stepped forward, projecting a holographic model into the air. Timelines branched and collapsed, glowing lines intersecting like veins of light. Every attempt to stabilize time eventually leads to the same outcome. A centralized authority controlling causality itself, and that authority, Elias said, becomes humanity's prison. The general scoffed. You expect us to believe that the solution is to do nothing? No, Elias replied. The solution is to choose uncertainty. That answer unsettled them more than any prediction of extinction ever could. Meanwhile, the other travelers were not waiting. The woman in the Swiss laboratory, known only as Lyra, stood before a humming device that bent space around it. Her future was different from Elias's. In her timeline, humanity had achieved perfect order. No wars, no poverty, no chaos. No freedom. Lyra believed that future was worth preserving. She activated her communicator. Temporal stability is improving. Phase 2 is viable. Her superior responded instantly, voice cold and precise. Proceed. Earth must be secured before divergence becomes irreversible. Lyra looked out the window at the mountains beyond the lab. For a moment, something like doubt flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. Across the world, governments began quietly recruiting the brightest minds, pulling them into classified programs with no clear purpose. They did not say the word time travel, but the implications were obvious. Humanity had always been curious. Now it was terrified. Elias felt the shift like a pressure wave. Time grew heavier, resistant. Each step forward felt like pushing against a storm. The temporal relay pulsed again. Anomaly alignment increasing, Mara said quietly after receiving the signal. It's no longer just observing. Elias nodded. It's reacting. Jonah looked between them. Reacting how? Elias hesitated. In the future, he said, the anomaly never intervened directly. It didn't need to. Humanity destroyed itself trying to control it. Calder's voice was low. And now, Elias said, it's correcting faster, as if summoned by his words. Alarms blared throughout the facility. A scientist rushed in, breathless. "Sir, we're detecting gravitational distortions in orbit. Something is forming." Elias closed his eyes. The future was no longer waiting. The object appeared above Earth without warning. Not a ship, not a structure. A presence. It distorted light, bending the stars around it into curved halos. Instruments struggled to define it, registering mass that did not obey conventional physics. The anomaly had never been this close before. Global communication networks lit up with panic. People around the world stared into the sky, feeling a primal fear that bypassed logic. Animals fled. Children cried. Even those who could not see it felt its weight pressing down on their thoughts. Elias watched the feeds in silence. "This didn't happen like this," Annika whispered. "In our future, it stayed distant." "That future doesn't exist anymore," Elias replied. The anomaly was adapting, and worse, it was learning. Inside the anomaly, something processed the change. It did not think as humans did. It did not experience emotion, but it recognized patterns, and those patterns had begun to fracture. Earth's timeline was no longer converging on a single outcome. That made humanity dangerous. The anomaly responded the only way it knew. How? It initiated containment. The first strike was not violent. Cities did not burn. No weapons fired. Instead, probabilities shifted. Power grids failed in impossible ways. Transportation systems malfunctioned simultaneously across continents. Digital networks experienced cascading errors that no human code should have produced. Society slowed. Panic crept in. Elias watched as news anchors struggled to explain events that defied explanation. The anomaly wasn't attacking humanity's bodies. It was attacking its systems. The same systems humanity would one day rely on completely. "It's testing dependency," Mara said. "Seeing how fragile we are." Jonah clenched his fists. "So what do we do?" Elias turned to him. "We remind humanity how to live without certainty." The other travelers were not idle. Lara and her faction escalated their efforts, feeding government solutions disguised as innovation. Stabilization protocols, predictive governance, systems designed to eliminate risk. People welcomed them because fear makes control attractive. Elias confronted Lara in person 2 days later, tracking her to a remote facility hidden beneath layers of secrecy. They stood across from each other in a sterile chamber, humming with restrained power. "You're accelerating the collapse," Elias said. Lara shook her head. "I'm preventing chaos." "You're creating a cage," he replied. Lara's eyes hardened. "And you're gambling with extinction for the chance to remain human," Elias shot back. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lara whispered, "You don't understand what comes after your path." "I've seen it," Elias said softly, "and it terrifies me more than death." Outside, Earth teetered. The anomaly adjusted again. This time, it did not target systems. It targeted people. Across the planet, individuals began experiencing memories from futures that no longer existed. Soldiers remembered wars they never fought. Engineers recalled designs they had never learned. Children spoke languages no one recognized. Humanity was remembering itself, and that terrified the anomaly, because a species that could learn across timelines could not be controlled. Elias felt it in his bones. The future was no longer fixed. It was fighting to exist. Governments lost control faster than anyone expected. Protests erupted. Communities disconnected from centralized systems. People began sharing information organically, adapting, surviving without guidance. The anomaly pulsed brighter in the sky. Its containment protocol was failing. Elias stood with the others on a rooftop overlooking the city, watching humanity do what it had always done best: endure. "They're choosing chaos," Jonah said in awe. "They're choosing freedom," Annika replied. Calder looked up at the anomaly. "And it doesn't know how to handle that." Elias smiled faintly, but the battle was far from over, because the anomaly had one final response left, and when it deployed it, Earth would face a choice no species had ever faced before. Far above the planet, space-time folded inward. A signal formed, not a message, a decision. The anomaly was about to rewrite the timeline completely. Elias felt the future collapse inside him like a dying star. "This is it," he said quietly, and Earth stood on the edge of becoming something entirely new. The sky above Earth no longer belonged to the present. The anomaly hung there, like a scar carved into reality, vast and silent, bending the stars around it into unnatural curves. Day and night lost their meaning beneath its shadow. Satellites struggled to maintain orbit. Astronomers stopped using familiar language because nothing they saw fit into known laws of physics. For the first time in human history, the future was not a distant concept. It was watching. Across the planet, humanity felt it. People woke in the middle of the night with the same thought pressing against their minds. Heavy and undeniable. Something was wrong with time. Something was deciding their fate. Without asking, Elias Cates stood inside a hardened observation chamber, surrounded by screens showing every angle of the anomaly. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, older than when he had arrived, burdened by knowledge no human mind was meant to hold. "This is the moment," he said quietly. Mara Voss stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the data stream scrolling faster than human vision should allow. The anomaly's probability curves just collapsed. It's no longer calculating outcomes. Jonah swallowed. "Then what is it doing?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He already knew. "It's choosing," he said. In the future Elias came from, humanity believed choice was a weakness, predictability meant safety, control meant survival. Every decision was optimized, every outcome simulated before it happened. Free will was tolerated only when it did not interfere with efficiency. That mindset had shaped the anomaly's interest in Earth. Humanity had become something fascinating to observe, a species capable of surviving impossible conditions by surrendering unpredictability, a species slowly transforming itself into something stable, quiet, controllable. Until time fractured. Now the anomaly faced something it had never encountered before, a species remembering multiple futures at once. All over the world, humans experienced moments of impossible clarity. A woman driving through traffic suddenly remembered dying in a city that did not exist yet. A soldier training on a base remembered commanding troops in a war centuries away. A child stared at the night sky and spoke the names of stars that would not be discovered for generations. These were not dreams, they were echoes. Time travelers had torn holes in causality, and human minds were slipping through them. Governments tried to suppress the phenomenon. Emergency broadcasts urged calm. Medical explanations were offered, dismissed, replaced with new ones just as quickly. None of it worked. Because this time, humanity was not waiting for permission to understand. They were adapting. Elias met with Director Hayes again, deep inside a facility designed to withstand nuclear impact. The air was tense, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. "You didn't tell us everything," Hayes said. "No," Elias replied calmly. "Because you weren't ready." She leaned forward. "Are we ready now?" Elias looked at the screen behind her, where the anomaly loomed like an unblinking eye. "You're running out of time not to be," he said. Hayes exhaled slowly. "Tell me what happens next." Elias chose his words carefully. "The anomaly will attempt to collapse all divergent timelines into a single, stable outcome. One future, one version of humanity, and that future is?" Hayes asked. Elias met her gaze. "Not human." The room fell silent. "You're saying it will erase us?" She said quietly. "No," Elias replied. "It will preserve you, but only the parts it understands. Emotion will be optimized, creativity minimized, conflict removed, and free will." Elias didn't hesitate. "Deleted." Hayes leaned back, stunned. "Then why hasn't it already done this?" "Because it's afraid," Elias said. Hayes laughed bitterly. "Afraid of us. Afraid of what we become when we're unpredictable," Elias answered. "A species that can't be simulated is a threat to anything that relies on control above Earth." The anomaly shifted, energy rippled across its surface, not violently, but with intent. Instruments detected a massive surge of temporal compression. Entire centuries were being folded inward, stacked like pages of a book forced closed. Time screamed. Elias felt it in his chest, a pressure that made breathing difficult. The future he came from flickered, unstable, collapsing into static inside his mind. Mara grabbed the console. "Temporal anchors are destabilizing. If it finishes the compression, all divergent timelines collapse into one." Jonah's voice shook. "Can we stop it?" Elias stared at the anomaly. "No," he said, "but humanity can." Across the globe, something extraordinary happened. People began choosing differently, not because they understood what was happening, but because instinct told them something fundamental was at stake. Communities disconnected from centralized systems and organized locally. Scientists shared research openly instead of hoarding it. Militaries hesitated instead of acting. Artists created without knowing why it felt urgent. Humanity leaned into chaos, and the anomaly faltered. Its model struggled to update. Probability branches multiplied instead of converging. The more humans chose unpredictability, the less stable the anomaly's calculations became. For the first time, it hesitated. Lara watched the data spike with disbelief, her screens filled with red warnings as the stabilization curves collapsed. "This isn't possible," she whispered, her superior's voice cut in sharply. "What is happening?" "They're refusing optimization," Lara said. "They're choosing inefficient outcomes." "Correct it," the voice ordered. Lara's hands hovered over the controls. She remembered Elias's words. A cage for the first time. Doubt broke through her certainty. If her future survived only by erasing choice, was it worth preserving? The anomaly pulsed again, stronger this time. Lara made her decision. She shut down her stabilizer. The effect was immediate. A shockwave rippled through space-time, not destructive, but liberating. Suppressed timelines surged back into existence. Memories flooded human consciousness, not as overwhelming visions, but as understanding. Humanity saw itself clearly, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as survivors who refused to be simplified. Elias felt tears sting his eyes. "This is it," he whispered. "They're doing it." Mara stared at the readings in awe. "They're overwhelming the anomaly with variables." Jonah laughed, breathless. "We're too chaotic to erase." Calder, silent until now, spoke softly. "We always were." The anomaly reacted violently, not with destruction, but with retreat. It pulled inward, compressing itself, abandoning its attempt to overwrite Earth's timeline. The future fractured again, but this time it did not collapse. It stabilized, not into one future, but into many. The sky above Earth cleared slowly, the distortion fading until the stars returned to their familiar shapes. Systems across the planet rebooted. Power grids stabilized. Communications restored. Humanity exhaled. But Elias knew the truth. This was not victory. It was survival. In the aftermath, governments scrambled to regain control. Some tried. Many failed. The old structures no longer fed a species that had glimpsed its own potential. Time travelers began disappearing one by one. Their purpose fulfilled. Their presence no longer necessary. Elias stood alone on a hill overlooking the city at dawn. The anomaly now gone, leaving only quiet skies behind. Annika joined him. "What happens now?" Elias smiled faintly. "Now humanity chooses, and the future?" she asked. Elias looked toward the rising sun. "The future is no longer watching," he said. "It's listening, somewhere beyond time." The anomaly recalculated its priorities. Earth was no longer a variable to be controlled. It was a constant. A species that could not be reduced. A future that could not be owned. And that terrified the universe more than extinction ever could. The silence that followed the anomalies. Retreat felt unreal. For the first time in weeks, the sky above Earth was simply the sky again. No distortions. No unnatural light. No sense of being watched. Clouds drifted slowly, indifferent to the history that had almost been erased beneath them. Humanity stood still, unsure whether it was allowed to breathe. Elias Cade felt it more deeply than anyone. The pressure inside his chest, the constant pull of collapsing timelines, had vanished. The future he came from no longer existed in any meaningful way. Not destroyed, not overwritten. Released. He stood on the same bridge where he had once whispered that they were running out of time. Below him, traffic moved again. People walked, talked, laughed. Life continued, fragile and imperfect. "Human, this is what it feels like," he murmured. "When the future lets go, across the world." The effects of the temporal crisis settled unevenly. Some people remembered fragments of other lives. Others felt only a lingering sense of loss without knowing why. Children asked strange questions about tomorrow. Artists created works that felt older than civilization itself. Scientists found gaps in their understanding that could never quite be filled. But humanity adapted. They always did. Governments convened emergency summits, attempting to restore authority, to explain the unexplainable. Some nations tightened control, desperate to reclaim certainty. Others loosened their grip, understanding that the world had changed too deeply to be forced back into old shapes. The era of blind progress was over. The era of chosen progress had begun. Director Hayes met Elias one final time in a quiet room overlooking the city. There were no guards this time, no recorders, just the people who understood how close everything had come to ending. "You won't be staying," Hayes said. Elias shook his head. "I can't. My presence still destabilizes things. Time tolerates me now, but it won't forever. She studied him carefully. Did we do the right thing? Elias smiled faintly. Humanity never does the right thing. We do the necessary thing, and then we live with it. Hayes nodded slowly. Will they come back? The anomaly? Not like this, Elias replied. Earth is no longer predictable enough to be worth controlling. She exhaled, half amused, half terrified. So chaos saved us? No, Elias corrected gently. Choice saved you. The other travelers gathered one last time beneath the night sky. Mara Voss looked relieved for the first time since Elias had known her. I can finally stop calculating outcomes. Jonah grinned. I think I want to live a life without knowing how it ends. Annika gazed at the stars. History will never record what really happened. That's okay, Elias said. It wasn't meant to. Calder stood apart, watching the city lights flicker below. What happens to us? We fade, Elias answered, gently, like ripples settling after a stone sinks. And humanity? Jonah asked. Elias looked at them all. They become something new, he said. Not gods, not monsters, just human. One by one, the travelers disappeared. Not violently, not suddenly, just quietly removed from causality, their purpose complete. Elias was the last. Before he faded, Elias returned to the rainy street where he had first arrived. It wasn't raining now. The city felt warmer, louder, alive in a way he had never known in his own time. He watched people pass him, unaware of how close their future had come to vanishing. He smiled. This version is better. He whispered. And then he was gone. Years passed. Humanity did not rush back toward the same mistakes, not because they remembered clearly, but because something fundamental had shifted. The future was no longer treated as a destination to be conquered, but as a responsibility to be earned. Technology advanced more slowly, more carefully. Artificial intelligence remained a tool, not an authority. Exploration continued, but with caution. When humanity finally reached the stars, they did so with humility forged by near erasure. Alien civilizations noticed the change. Humans were still unpredictable, still intense, still shaped by a death world that demanded resilience. But they were no longer racing toward domination. They were choosing balance. Some species feared that more than ever. Others respected it. Far beyond the galaxy. In the quiet spaces between realities, the anomaly observed one final time. Earth no longer followed a clean trajectory. Its timelines branched endlessly, overlapping in ways that defied simulation. Every attempt to model humanity collapsed under contradiction. It marked Earth as a fixed uncertainty and turned its attention elsewhere, on Earth. Long after Elias Cade became a forgotten name, a child stood beneath a clear night sky and asked a simple question. Do you think the future is watching us? Her mother smiled softly. No, she said. I think the future is waiting for us to decide. The child nodded, satisfied, and went back inside. The stars remained silent. Humanity never learned the full truth. They never knew how close they came to becoming something hollow. They never knew about the travelers who erased themselves so others could choose freely. But the truth lived on. Anyway, in hesitation, in doubt, in courage, in every moment where humanity chose not the safest path, but the most meaningful one, and that was enough.